Operation Encore is a 501c nonprofit that is helping veterans turn into rock stars every single day. You can learn more about what Operation Encore is doing by going over to their website at www.operationencore.org. That is www.operationencore.org. If you can give them a hand, just click that little donate button or follow all of their social medias and learn exactly what they are doing to change the lives of our veterans every single day. Hey, welcome everybody to Drunk Dudes in a Gun Room. So today's episode, I know we have talked about this topic for a few times this last year. I think it is a extremely important topic. So we are going to get into it. Today's guest is Jenisue Jessen, a survivor of human trafficking and founder and CEO of Compass 31, has dedicated over 25 years to combating human trafficking globally. Her remarkable journey from being sold into the sex trade at the age of 4 to becoming a key figure in shaping federal counter-trafficking policies reflects her passion for justice and resilience as the force behind Echoes of Eden collective society conscious luxury skincare line. Let's bring on Jenisue Jessen.
It's good to join you this evening.
Yeah, likely. So we've had another guest on, and I'm going to be honest. When I had her on, I did not know. I was in the stereotypical world of human trafficking. I learned a lot that episode. My eyes got awakened. And after hearing her story, I realized I think a lot of people see it and don't realize that they're seeing it. I really do.
Absolutely. It is happening all around us. And I'm glad your eyes were opened to this critical issue.
Yeah. I mean, when I heard it before, all I really thought of was like slave labor and sex trafficking, right? I didn't really think about it in the aspects of like every day you'd see people walking down the street not knowing what's happening behind the scenes was a form of human trafficking. People working in family restaurants that was brought here from the United States and then forced to work there to cover their rent in the house that they're forced to take care of as maids. I mean, those types of things, you don't see it, you don't know it, but it also opened my eyes to some things I seen while I was deployed overseas. You know, the government was really big on human trafficking, but we hired a bunch of contractors that was basically doing human trafficking. And I didn't know it at that time, but they were all being paid based off of racial class, not their jobs. You know, I had multiple mechanics that worked for me, and depending what country they came from, depended on their living standards as well as their wages, even though they were doing the same jobs. And it was crazy when she said that. It really opened my eyes. But before we dig into that, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and where you came from?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing this time with me. I'm very excited for our conversation. You already introduced me. My name is Jenisue, and I myself am a survivor. I grew up in southern Missouri. Actually, I was born, I think, in your stomping grounds. I was born in Rolla, Missouri, and grew up in the southwest corner of the state, what many would call the buckle of the Bible Belt. And my grandfather started selling me to other men for sex when I was 4 years old. And so that's how I grew up, was ongoing, complex, compound trauma. So in kindergarten, I was praying every night that God would just let me die. In second grade, I sat in a church on a Sunday morning behind a man who had paid to rape me the night before. And the abuse just went on and on until at the age of 17, desperate to escape, I attempted and failed to end my life through suicide. But the day after that, I ended up having an appointment at a local clinic and found out that I was pregnant. And so God used those circumstances and that pregnancy to awaken in me kind of a mama bear instinct, where I had never successfully been able to fight back on my own behalf. Now I had this innocent child to protect. And so with that newfound courage and voice, I was finally able to disclose to a counselor a little bit about what was happening, enough for her to intervene in our situation. and bring myself and my child to freedom. So that's the background. That's where justice was woven into my DNA. I grew up in that environment. And since then, God has allowed me to start a nonprofit, an international counter-trafficking organization called Compass 31. And we have prevention programs operating in 43 countries, and we have restoration work ongoing in 5 countries right now. So that's the background and expertise that brings me to you today.
Wow, man. So yes, I'm living in Rolla right now. So we do have that in common. Did this all take place in Missouri? Is this where
it did? Yeah. The vast majority of my trafficking was in about a 3-hour radius of that southwest corner, Springfield, Joplin area. We did go as far as northern Arkansas. We did go as far as eastern Oklahoma, but all kind of in that Midwest region.
Wow. I mean, I can't even imagine what has to go through somebody's mind to do something like this. I mean,
right. You can't really logic your way around it. How and why a man, most of the buyers, the perpetrators are primarily men, but what would drive them to pay money to perpetrate violence on a child? It is pretty unthinkable. And as you might imagine, growing up in that, I didn't have any way to understand or reconcile what was happening or why it was happening. So as most survivors of trafficking, I assumed it had to be my fault.
Yeah. And 4 years old, you have no way of knowing whether what's happening is right, wrong. You just know you don't like it, and there's no way that you can understand that. If you don't even understand that something is being done illegally, you don't even know how to fight back at it. And I just, wow,
Yeah, I didn't. I mean, obviously, I knew the violence, I knew the pain, and I knew the shame of it, but I didn't know or recognize that it wasn't normal. That was normal life for me. I didn't know that it wasn't something that everybody didn't experience.
And that part of it I can completely relate to, because as a combat veteran, the people that you see over there, everybody asks, well, how can they live like that? Well, they've never been to America. They don't know what America is. They don't know what kind of freedoms we have. So that is normal life to them. And if you don't know, then you're not missing it. And so I can relate to that aspect of it. I have growing up, I've been around girls that had been molested that went to my school, and it came out and stuff like that. But until I started this podcast, I didn't know anything about human trafficking. And I think both of them, the perpetrators should get, the death penalty. I just don't think we have strict enough laws. I really don't.
We really don't. We don't.
But so do you know, now that you're older, do you know how, you said it was your grandfather or your father that?
It was my grandfather, was my primary perpetrator.
And you lived with him, or did you live with your father?
Yes, lived part-time with my grandparents. My dad was an alcoholic and my mom was addicted to my dad. And so whenever my home life was in crisis, which was quite frequently, as most cycles of addiction are, they would send me to live at my grandparents' house. And my grandparents lived 3 hours away from where my parents were living at the time. Wow. When I had those extended stays at my grandfather's house or my grandparents' house, that's when he had the opportunity to do what he did.
So do you know if this was you the first person that he did this with, or had he already established how to do this?
Oh, no. He was a pretty prolific perpetrator, and there were many other children that were in the group that I was exploited in and among.
Wow.
Yeah. Prolific and profitable. One thing that is curious that your listeners might not be aware of is my grandfather, like most traffickers, they actually have multiple streams of revenue. So he would profit first just from the exchange of money for violence. The perpetrator hands over cash, then comes to claim from me what he had paid for. So that's the first way my grandfather would profit. But then during the violence, my grandfather would video or take pictures of the crime. And he would use those images then to blackmail the perpetrator so that they paid again and again and again. And when there came a time, if or when they could not or would not pay the blackmail money anymore, he would then sell those images on the black market. Back in those days, we would have called it child pornography. Now the language has been updated. We call it child sex abuse material. I prefer crime scene photos, but he would sell those. So he had 3 streams of revenue from one act of violence that made it highly, highly profitable, which most traffickers do. You know, if you're trafficking in drugs, you sell your product once and it's consumed. But if you're trafficking in people, then you can monetize that in a number of ways and profit into perpetuity, actually.
Wow. Yeah, man, I just can't even fathom how you would start, how you would even meet people to do this. Now I guess it would be easier. You search for it on the web somehow and find groups, and I guess you would meet people that way. But back then, I mean, it's not like you're just sitting at a bar and saying, "Hey, what are you doing this weekend?" Well, I know something,
right?
Especially something as illegal as this.
Right.
There would have to be some sort of vetting process, but to be that large, doing it that much, and
yeah, people ask me quite frequently, like, how did my grandfather find clients or establish those relationships? And I have to answer, I'm really glad that I don't know and understand how that mindset works. How you could possibly, 1, think it's a good idea, 2, make it profitable, and 3, marketable. I don't understand the logic of that, and I'm really, really grateful that I don't.
Yeah, I don't even want to try. I will tell you, I like the YouTube videos of these guys that are out there bringing sexual predators to light. They're going out acting like younger kids and getting them to meet and exposing them. Maybe there's nothing they can do at that moment, but now it's going to be seen by hundreds of thousands of people, and they turn the names into law enforcement, which puts them on their radar. So I love the people that do that stuff. I think it's another unsung hero because of the dangers that they potentially are putting themselves in.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I don't.
It's always good when the bad guy gets got,
isn't
it?
It is.
I think that's probably another place that you and I have a lot in common, is being about freedom and justice. The perpetrators are held accountable for.
Yeah, especially sex crimes, not just against children, but rape and all of those. You can say it's a sickness or a mental health disorder or whatever you want, but at the end of the day, I think it's more of an addiction that is way more dangerous if somebody that you treat relapses from that.
Right.
They're hurting other people now, not just themselves.
Yeah, I have a really curious and unpopular opinion about that, actually. And that is rape and sexual exploitation, and even a lot of pornography, sexual assault. All of those crimes are crimes of power, not sex. So it's a crime of power that's carried out through sex, but the purpose isn't sex. That's how it's carried out. So it's a crime of power. And I think it is growing at such an exponential rate because in our current Western culture, and this is true in a lot of the world, but it's definitely true here in the US, we have this growing third wave feminism, which is totally different than original women owning property and being able to vote and all of that good and righteous. But where we are with third wave feminism is what I call a complete cultural emasculation of men. We use these really demeaning and belittling phrases like manspreading and mansplaining, and men can't open doors, they can't compliment women, they don't know how to flirt anymore because all of that's off the table. We have completely emasculated men for being men. And when we have that being worked out, then we have a whole bunch of men who are driven to seek power in illicit ways because they're not enabled or empowered to live their power in a righteous way, to be brave, to be fierce, to be masculine, to be muscular, to be powerful. All of that's undermined in our culture, and therefore they're driven to gain power in illicit ways, and they're often carrying that out through sexual exploitation or sexual assault. So that's my unpopular opinion about one of the driving forces.
I don't think it should be unpopular because I can completely understand that. I personally grew up, I was adopted by my grandparents, but my mom sought money in that way. She became a prostitute living in Colorado. And ironically enough, after my mom and dad had separated years down the road, my dad ended up starting a escort service. The little bit when I was around my dad, I was able to talk to some of these girls, and just out of curiosity from being really young, I would ask questions. And I could completely see that, because a lot of the Johns, it wasn't just about sex. It was wanting to control and just do things that they wouldn't do at their house.
Are you ready to experience the power of military community right from the comfort of your living room? Introducing Military United podcast streams, now available on the Roku channel. Get ready to dive into a world of incredible stories, inspiring discussions, and the best entertainment the military community has to offer. With our veteran podcast host, you'll gain insights into the experiences that have shaped our heroes. And that's not all. We've got a lineup of talented veteran musicians playing rock, country, and more. Get ready to rock out with these incredible artists who have served our country and are now ready to entertain you with their soulful tunes. But wait, there's more. We've also got veteran comedians who will have you in stitches with their hilarious and relatable stories. Laughter is the best medicine, and these brave men and women know how to deliver it. So gather your loved ones, grab some popcorn, and prepare for an unforgettable journey into the world of military podcast, music, and comedy. With Military United podcast streams now on Roku, you can access all this incredible content with just a few clicks of a button. Military United podcast streams on Roku channel. It's time to honor, entertain, and celebrate the incredible men and women who have served our country. Join us today and experience the power of the military community like never before.
And it wasn't always sexual,
Right.
So there's definitely a better way that you can gain that than going down that road, So I definitely don't take it as an excuse. It's not an illness. It was a choice. I think people still know right and wrong. No different than if you're addicted to drugs, when you're taking it, whether it's right or wrong, you just can't control it. And so I think this is a similar situation where it falls more under an addiction that they just can't control. And that addiction doesn't have to be sex, like you said. It could be the addiction of feeling that power, and maybe they're not physically strong, so they can't go and dominate some guy at a bar and get in a bar fight, or they can't do some of these other things. They're not brave enough to become the next mobster, so they take it out where they can take it, even if they're paying to allow somebody to do it,
Yeah.
But man, so
there absolutely is a thing of toxic masculinity. I'm intimately acquainted, years and years of that. However, I think overall men have the capacity to be fiercely protective and noble and loving. And I think often we're failing to see the best in men, and instead we see a whole lot of broken men acting out, gaining power in illicit ways. Yeah. And it's really unfortunate, because the casualties go across the board. Not only the person that he's victimizing, who he's perpetrating violence against, but his own heart and soul, and that of his family, and that of his community, because sex crimes don't happen in a vacuum.
No.
It impacts a whole community of people.
And there's another part of this too. Let's not forget the victim. Most victims, I know personally, because I had a soldier that was put underneath me because she was sexually assaulted, and I ended up having to kick her out of the military because the way she dealt with that trauma was smoking weed. Yeah. And so if she got in trouble, they took some of her rank, they gave her extra duty, but we convinced the chain of command, because of the circumstances, to let her stay in the military. And then 6 months later, she pissed hot again. And that was the second time we had to kick her out. Realistically, what we did is we gave somebody zero help for the trauma and threw them on the streets,
Unfortunately.
And again, yes, she was smoking weed to deal with the circumstances.
And what is true is that we all seek ways to escape our pain, whatever the source of the pain is, whether it's trauma, violence, disease, betrayal, broken relationship, whatever the brokenness is, we seek ways to medicate it.
Yep.
And we can seek comfort in ways that are beneficial and productive or not beneficial and self-destructive. But we're all seeking the same thing. What's the remedy for this pain? And every person has to navigate that on their own, in their own way. For me, my faith is the piece that brought redemption to my story and propelled me into healthy ways of coping instead of unhealthy ways of coping and managing the pain.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do find that eventually. I know I did. I was a drinker. That's what I did, and that's how I dealt with things. And over the years, I have finally found therapy and some groups and got help that way, some medication, and now I might have maybe 2 drinks a week. It was mostly because, just like you said, when I would drink to go to sleep. So when I laid my head down and that moment of silence, my brain would stop flowing and I could sleep. Otherwise, I would lay there and start thinking about things and be up for days.
Yeah, that's another common ground between combat veterans and those that have experienced and escaped from trafficking is some variation. I mean, it's a wide spectrum, but post-traumatic stress. And clinically, we call it post-traumatic stress disorder, but I don't think it's a disorder. I think it is a perfectly rational reaction to unthinkable circumstances. Our body and our mind trying to reconcile something that doesn't make sense, keeps replaying it, and our body responds as if it's happening right now. And so that collection of symptoms actually, I think, is an indication of health. It means your body and mind and heart are working in sync. You've witnessed this horrible thing or participated in this horrible thing, and now you have to reconcile it. And your body and mind and soul are all working in concert to reconcile it, which is why we have the collection of symptoms that we label post-traumatic stress. But it's really common in both survivors of sexual exploitation and combat veterans,
Yep. And I'm going to tell you how I didn't realize that PTSD isn't a military issue. It's not an American. I thought it was an American military issue. And my mind, because I was so internal dealing with myself, never thought about it going any deeper until recently. This past end of last season, I had a guest on that was a British soldier.
Okay.
The show had nothing to do with mental health. That it was about talking about the differences of his experiences in Afghanistan compared to mine. And also him to tell his story. Well, at the very end of it, he said something that I just couldn't believe. He has a podcast. He has 2 of them. And one of them is for mental health because they have too many British soldiers killing themselves. And I was like, you guys have that problem too? And it made me realize that it's not a military problem. It's a human reaction to trauma.
It is.
That is it.
Completely human.
And then it took me down another rabbit hole. Like I wonder if the soldiers that I was fighting against over there, I wonder if they've got the same issue. Do they have people killing themselves for what happened over there? Because
I'm sure that they do.
I'm sure no matter what side you're on war, it's not a pleasant experience.
Right.
So let me ask you this. So your parents were fighting and having issues. Was there child abuse going on in that household as well? Were you getting it from both sides?
There was. My dad did the best that he could. He absolutely was an alcoholic. And I would say he's probably one of the most empathetic people I've ever known, but he couldn't reconcile all that's broken in the world. It was just too much for him to bear. And so he like we already talked about, used alcohol to self-medicate to escape from that. Unfortunately, when he drank, he would be violent. So against myself, my mom got beat up quite a bit. I don't know how many times he broke his watch, in a fit of rage, swinging his fists. So that was part of how alcohol impacted him and how he acted out that addiction. It was just so much less violent than what I experienced at my grandparents' house.
Right.
So I know a lot of individuals who grew up in an alcoholic home, who endured child abuse, and that can be absolutely crippling. For me, that was like going home was the better place to be, even considering that. But again, I think my parents were trying to do the best they knew how to do by sending me away. They thought that was the better option.
And so did your grandma know this was happening too?
She did. My grandma knew what was happening. And I mean, there were a couple of instances that absolutely she knew. And one instance in particular, she took me school clothes shopping. It was the end of the summer. It was time to go back to school. And she came into the fitting room as I was trying on an outfit, and she saw my thighs being really extensively bruised, and she stopped cold, and her eyes got big, and she sucked in her breath, and she looked at me and she went, "We will never ever talk of this," and turned around and walked out. And we didn't. And then ultimately, as a young adult, when I finally came forth and told what had happened, and kind of my whole family blew up during that first confrontation, my grandmother sat there shaking her head and crying the whole time I was talking. And at the end, she said, "Well, it's not incest because you're not blood," because I was adopted into my family as well.
So that makes it better.
So for her, that was how she justified keeping her mouth shut and her social status secure was, "Well, you're not blood."
Unreal. Wow. So, I mean, that's just like saying, you're sitting in your house and you find out that it's happening to the neighbor kid, and you're saying, well, none of my business. It had nothing to do with my kids. Have you ever wondered how you can help out the show? Well, that is very simple. You can help us out by going to www.twodrunkdudesinAgunroom.com. That is www.twodrunkdudesinAgunroom. There's many ways you can help us by listening to the show, supporting the show, liking, sharing, and everything else that comes along with social media. But one of our biggest goals is to help build the nonprofit Heroes Voice Media Foundation. This is a foundation that has decided to start celebrating courage and amplifying heroes. Find your voice with Heroes Voice Media.
You know what, though? That's what's happening in our world.
I believe it.
There is exploitation happening all around us, violence happening all around us. And we are so busy scurrying through life. Either, I got to get here, I got to get here, I got to get here. From work to the market, to home, to cook dinner, to pick up the kids, to back and forth, go to bed and do it all again, that we don't pay attention to what's happening around us. Situational awareness is completely absent. And if we're not absent in that way, then we're just scrolling through our phone and not paying attention to the people who are right in front of us. A really silly example of that is not long ago, I fainted. And when I fainted, I fell and busted my eyebrow. I had now 6 stitches here. But I had this magnificent black eye for about 2.5, almost 3 weeks. I mean, like the whole side of my face. I looked like a boxer. And I couldn't hide it with makeup. And I was nervous about going out in the world because it was my left side. So if I had a right-handed perpetrator, where am I going to get hit? Right. Yep. And it was a mess. And I went to the grocery store. I went to the bank. I went to the dog park where I played with my dogs every afternoon. And in 2.5 weeks, I went to church, to small group. I went all over the city, normal life. And in 2.5 weeks, not a single person asked, "Hey, are you okay?" Like they didn't even joke about it. Like, "Oh my gosh, did you walk into a door? What happened?" Yeah. They totally didn't acknowledge. People who knew me well and people who didn't know me at all didn't acknowledge. Wow. That was just, it was a silly accident. I fainted. But had I been being victimized, I would have encountered no help in that 2.5 weeks.
I can't count how many times that my mom has gone to the doctor's office and they know that she lives with me. And she's got, I mean, you can just, the wind walking past her is enough to bruise her. She just gets bruises everywhere. Hits her hands against the door, or dog jumps up on her, whatever, And whenever she goes to the doctor's office, that's something they always ask her. Are you okay at home?
Yeah.
All these bruises. And I completely get it. I don't take offense at that, because, I would much rather them ask and it not be happening than to not ask and it is happening.
They say research indicates that at least 67% of trafficking survivors encounter healthcare workers during the course of their exploitation, and with very little effective intervention. And I encountered healthcare professionals over the course of my exploitation, and they were not equipped to intervene in any effective way. And so they didn't. And my exploitation continued.
Man, being in the trucking world, I didn't realize, when I first started, how, everybody joked about lot lizards and stuff like that from the old days, but until being the new age trucker, the companies were getting really big on human trafficking. So the companies gave us a sticker that we could put in our window, and it said, if you need help, I'm somebody that can help you.
Yeah.
And I'd never personally seen anything that I thought was trafficking. And I can tell you that the number of prostitutions at truck stops has decreased tremendously. But I have seen, a few situations that made me question. Some very young girls. I had one that came up to me. She followed me to my truck, and she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm getting ready to leave." She said, "Do you need a rider?" I said, "No, I don't." And I said, "Do you need some help?" And she goes, "No, I just need a ride." And I said, "Well, I'm not taking any riders." And she goes, "So you're going to make me get down?" I said, "No, you don't have to. You just have to hold on really tight, but you're not getting in the truck." But she was really young as well, and that is why I asked her that, do you need some help? And I didn't see anybody else around her. And I don't know her story, but it always weighed on my mind that was somebody's daughter, and you could tell there was drugs. She was definitely high on something. And, the more I visit this topic, the more I just kind of dig back in my mind to see, go through memories of, was I that person that you just described as not paying attention and not being aware of it?
Yeah.
And I think also this is a topic that a lot of people don't want to really talk about. And those are the topics that we should talk about.
Right.
Because, if we did, then we could openly discuss the drug abuse problem that's affecting our kids. We could openly discuss all these sex crimes that are happening, and force our elected officials to do something versus doing something for themselves.
That would be amazing, wouldn't it?
It would. And again, I am a firm believer it starts, with the people.
It does. It's amazing and righteous, I think, to want a righteous government, politicians who are actually working on behalf of the people instead of themselves. And I served 2 years on the U.S. Advisory Council on Human Trafficking, which was a presidential appointment. And the job in that role is for 2 years. There's a council of survivors that are diving into federal counter-trafficking policies and then advising the senior policy advisors to the president's cabinet on what needs to be done differently. And it was an amazing opportunity and also wildly frustrating, because for trafficking to continue, it continues because there's complicity at so many levels. People who know that it's happening and they look the other way. Well, people that don't know that it's happening, sometimes willfully, like, no, I don't know. People who don't want to get involved, they do know that it's happening, but they look the other way. And people who are profiting from it. They have something to gain from the systems that are so very highly profitable. And And so I'm really glad that I had the opportunity. It was a 2-year term to serve in that capacity. And in some ways, it felt really impactful. And some ways, it was wildly frustrating.
Yeah, I could see the bureaucracy that goes into it. I think the American people are fixing to see part of that. And the medication I'm on makes me lose track of some stuff. But then I can't think of the guy's name that had an island that,
Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein. There's, I think, a lot of the same people that you're talking about right there, that not everybody in his book was part of it. But I can tell you that probably everybody in that book knew or had heard what else he's doing. That community nothing happens in that community without those people knowing it. That's how they became so powerful. And so I do 100% believe that. The guy had so much power, they did not want to tangle with him, and that they didn't want to stop it. The other thing I wanted to hit as well while we're doing this is you hear about, our border situation, right? And this is from a security standpoint, this is a prime time that trafficking probably at its largest, between the coyotes and everything else. How many people are given to coyotes to get them to the United States that never come to the United States, but they're sold to Saudi Arabia or wherever else? I don't think we'll ever know those numbers, but that border situation has to have an impact on this.
Oh, it's catastrophic. The fluidity of the border is absolutely a human rights catastrophe. And you mentioned something just to bring some clarity to the listeners. There's human smuggling and there's human trafficking. And if we had a Venn diagram, there's separate things, but there's an overlap. Right. So human smuggling is actually one person pays another to get them from point A to point B. And they're usually trying to illegally cross a border without documentation, right? Yep. And so that's where the coyotes come in and smuggling happens. And it's happening, it's epidemic at our southern border. But where it crosses over with trafficking is force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of commercial sex, labor, and or organs. So organ trafficking is on the rise. And so what happens is a lot of people pay a coyote or a smuggler to get them from point A to point B. And in this case, we're talking about our southern border. So coming into the US, but they're often going into debt to do that. And so once they get to their destination, the coyote keeps their documentation or their paperwork, or they're met there by traffickers because the individuals don't know their rights. The US, we are so liberal in what we provide for those that come into the country, even if they're coming into the country undocumented, but they don't know their rights. They are often met by traffickers who hire them on the spot. I've got a job for you. Come work in my hotel, come work in my restaurant. And some of them are being exploited through labor trafficking in agriculture, in spas, in restaurants, in hospitality, as maids, in domestic service. They're being exploited that way, but they're not getting paid.
Right.
And who are they going to report to? They're afraid to go to the police because they're here without their documentation, or they've come in not the proper channels, right? And so that's where the traffickers then come in. And so often the coyotes and the smugglers are working in concert or in cooperation with the traffickers, but there's two distinct businesses. One is earning money to bring the people, and one is earning money off of the exploitation of those now vulnerable people. And yeah, they are getting trafficked outside of the country, but they're getting trafficked in the US. Much of our farming, much of our industry, certainly sexual exploitation is happening. Children are getting, thousands and thousands of children a month are getting lost in the system, and there's no record of where these kids are.
Wow.
And if the people caring for them were good actors, we would know where they were. We would know what school they're in, what services they're receiving. But the fact that they come in and just disappear, well, it's catastrophic. I'm overusing the word catastrophic, but it is.
Yeah. No, I don't think we're overusing it at all. I think I think that exactly describes the situation. And man, how desperate do you have to be in your own country to have this happen to you and take those chances? I'm
Right.
sure they know this is a risk, when they make these agreements to help them get over here.
I think a lot of them know, but a lot of them, probably something you've learned in your life, the situations that you don't know what you don't know until you know it.
Yep.
The marketing for trafficking is amazing. So a lot of these people that are coming across our southern border, actually, they have been told that once you get to the US, you're going to get a phone, you're going to get health care. Once you have one member in the US is going to pay to bring the rest of your family over. You're going to get free school, college education, all of these things. So, and they're things that everybody wants. Everybody wants a better future. They want security for their family. They want financial stability. And they're promised if they take this risk and get to the US initially, if just one family member gets there, and often they're sending a child, because if your child's there, then they're going to bring the parents across. That's the marketing, right? And people believe it. And, maybe they believe it like they're cringing, like, I hope it's true. I want it to be true, but I'm going to choose to believe it's true. Wow. Some of them wholeheartedly, naively believe it.
Let me just hand you over my child on your word that you're going to get him to the States so I can get to the States too. That is unreal.
Right.
I said earlier, I was going through my mind thinking about situations, and I know exactly of some human trafficking that the United States, I know for a fact, knows about and does not do anything. So in Korea, when I was stationed in Korea, we called them drinky girls, right?
Yep.
You'd go down to the clubs and they would try to get you to buy drinks. It was orange juice is all it really was, but they were like $15, $20 a glass. That all got split up between them, to pay off their debt, what that bar had given them and everything else. And next to nothing went to them. And I watched so many soldiers pay this debt off so that they could marry that person and take them to the States. And at that time, I was really young. That was my first duty station. So I was from Podunk, nowhere, and didn't know anything about any of this type of stuff.
You're a baby.
I was 19 years old. Thinking back about it now, and something must have changed because, us soldiers talk. And when I was over there, it was all Koreans, Korean ran bar, all Korean girls. And now it's mostly Russian. They bring Russian girls over. And I think that should be a dead giveaway of what it really is. It's human trafficking. I don't care. There's no way to call it. And all these commanders on these bases are in contact with the local community,
Right.
on the good side of the local community as well, so there's no incidents,
Right.
But when you're dealing with these bars, what's going on, but they don't.
Yeah, it is no coincidence that all over the world where U.S. military bases are nearby is a local red light district. And we could have all kinds of discussions about how and why that unfolds. Even if so I would argue that sex work is neither sex nor work. Okay. It's a contract. The man paying, he's actually not paying for sex. He's paying for her to waive her consent so he can have what he wants. Would she have sex with him if he wasn't paying her? Chances are not. Right. So that's why it's not, I would argue it's neither sex nor work. Some of your listeners, maybe the majority, might disagree with that. That's totally okay. They're entitled to their opinion. But if they argue that it is a valid way to help these women in Vietnam and Korea, and they're in impoverished communities and now they're making money and they're supporting their families. There's all kinds of mental gymnastics that men go through to justify that this is a good, reasonable thing, right? But even if that were the case, there are not enough women who think, oh, this is a great idea. This is, as little girls, this is what I want to be when I grow up. This is how I will make money. There's not enough to meet the demand. Therefore, wherever sex work is legitimized, for instance, outside military bases, I mean, it's not just military, global. It's a global situation. Those are just hot spots that we can easily identify. Wherever we see that, though, there's never enough willing participants to meet the demand. Therefore, wherever sex work is legitimized, historically, we have the statistics to see that trafficking increases dramatically because they have to bring in the individuals to meet the demand. And those individuals are coming in because of force, fraud, or coercion.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I've had conversations with some of those girls, and absolutely, when they go into this debt, what they are told they're going to do is not what they're really going to do.
They believe they're getting a real job, and then they get there and they have this perceived debt.
Yep.
That they have to pay off before they can leave, and or their family's under threat if they don't pay it off.
And I say probably most of the time.
Right.
And one thing I always ask some of the soldiers, I always said, if it's so legitimate and you're so okay with it, so is this something you'd be okay with your daughter doing?
Right.
Now it hits home. Now it changes your mindset really quick.
Right.
And some of them, rightfully so, got mad about me saying that, but it was true,
What I usually do, I throw out the same question, like, so what if it's your sister? If your sister is working in this place, and would you be happy with that? If it's your mom, if it's your daughter, if it's your niece, would you be happy? How about you work in this bar for the next 6 weeks and then tell me how empowering it is?
Yep.
That's not a popular question.
No, but I completely agree with you. It's not work either. And I'm going to tell you why. In America, it's not uncommon for the manufacturing industry or a big corporation to pay to have you move or relocate if they hire you, right? And in most terms, they tell you have to sign a contract saying that you have to work at least X number of years or you have to pay that back. The key difference here is I can still leave. I just now have a debt that I'm contractually expected to pay back.
Right.
These people they can't leave.
Right.
They are being physically followed, kept bound. They're living in places that they can be monitored. That's the reason why they say we're going to give you a house to live in, and of course you're going to pay rent. So there's some more of my money that I get back.
Right.
And I have access to viewing and seeing your coming and going and everything else. Who's staying there? Why did so-and-so stay the night? And where's my money? And I think that's the key difference. If it was just work, then there wouldn't be no physical reason why you can't physically leave.
Yeah. But prostituted women have the highest prevalence of HIV of any other demographic in the U.S.
Absolutely.
A high percentage view suicide as their only means of escape. Yep. 80 to 95% of them report being raped by their clients.
Absolutely.
65 to 90% report being victims of childhood sexual assault. 60% come out of foster care. 75% have suffered physical injuries from violence in their job, including cuts, black eyes, stabbings, beatings, concussions, burns, broken bones, spinal injuries. So what other job has, obviously the military, you're at super high risk when you're in combat.
Right.
But besides combat veterans, what job do you sign up for knowing that this is the likelihood of 50% of prostituted women have a history of head injuries because of violent assault? They're 40% more likely to die of violence than any other profession. So is it work? Is it a job?
No, it definitely is not. And this conversation has just gave me a whole different look at that term. Prostitution is the oldest profession. I don't find anything professional about the conversation that we just had.
Yeah, it's not professional at all, is it?
It is not.
That's another one. Gentlemen's clubs makes me want to lose my religion. No, if they were gentlemen, they wouldn't be here.
Right. Yeah, you are 100% right, because and I think I think there's a confidence issue too, because you see that in the strip joints too. You know, a lot of the girls there feel that that's their only choice. They have
Right.
no other skills to offer.
Right.
You know, and that also could be coming from a childhood abuse. You know, it doesn't have to be physical.
Absolutely.
You know, and I grew up. So, like I said, I was adopted by my grandparents, but they also became foster parents later. And at one point we had 9 foster girls living in that house, and I was the only boy.
Yep.
And so I definitely seen and heard conversations of them talking amongst themselves about trauma that had happened. I was 3rd, 4th grade, at that time. And it is probably a very high percentage, like you said, in the foster care industry, because
It really, really is. Trafficking is always an exploitation of vulnerability. So the more vulnerability factors an individual has, the more likely they are to be trafficked, or the easier it is to exploit them. And so kids that are in the foster care system, they're not well bonded to any protective adult. They've been bounced around. A lot of the places that they've bounced to or from have been because of abuse or violence, and so they don't know who to trust, and that makes them really, really vulnerable to somebody coming in, showering them with love, making all these promises, seeing them. I see you, I hear you, I know you, I love you. And she follows him anywhere because he's meeting a need in a very specific and manipulative way to exploit her vulnerability.
Yep.
But just to clarify, and somebody, in case there's a sound clip, I'm not saying he's actually loving her. No. I'm saying he's exploiting her vulnerability.
Right. Operation Encore is a nonprofit that is helping veterans turn into rock stars every single day. You can learn more about what Operation Encore is doing by going over to their website at www.operationencore.org. That is www.operationencore.org. If you can give them a hand, just click that little donate button or follow all of their social medias and learn exactly what they are doing to change the lives of our veterans every single day.
And I think kids, little boys are boys, men, girls, women, non-binary people. They're all exploited, but the more vulnerabilities you have, the easier it is for a perpetrator to identify and exploit those vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, that makes sense. The foster care world is not necessarily a happy place. There's a lot of them out there that it's a puppy mill. They take on as many kids as they can for that government check, and then they give nothing back to the kids. And so other than food and the bare necessities, a roof over your head, that's some of them, that's literally all they're getting. So it would not be hard to show them something, a piece of something, whether it be true or not be true, to get them to leave or go with them. So I completely see that. And we had foster girls that ran away a couple times, and it was one girl wanting to leave and a younger girl deciding to follow her and go with her. They just didn't want to be in foster care. It wasn't, they, as a matter of fact, before they did it, they actually went down and gave my grandma a hug and said, "I'm sorry." And they had I guess they'd done something wrong and got punished earlier that day. And my grandma thought that's what they were talking about.
Right.
And she said, "It's okay. You'll learn." And they went to bed. And when we woke up, they were gone. Yeah. And that's what, we found out later that that's what they were saying sorry from when, they got caught, they got found a couple days later. But
and there's a whole complex series of things that comes into play for why that is. One, for somebody who's been exploited or experienced violence, and you come into a potentially healthy environment where there's boundaries, as soon as they feel safe, they start going, "Hey, wait, you don't get to control me. You don't get to tell me what to do," because they're finding their voice, which is a magical thing.
Yeah.
But also because of issues of attachment, unhealthy attachment, when love can be a terrifying thing. Chances are the people that have perpetrated the greatest violence professed to love them. And so when they start to feel safe and loved, all their alarm bells go off. because what's familiar is abuse and what's unfamiliar is love. And so they run from it. And then there's survivor guilt as well.
Right.
Especially when kids are in a good, loving environment, like, why am I here? But my siblings, my younger sister, or this other girl that I was on the streets with, or this other kid that I was exploited with is still on the streets. And we like survivor guilt, like, of combat, or why did I survive when somebody I loved didn't, somebody I respected didn't. Survivors of exploitation have that same drive. And so there's so many things that come into play that make it completely understandable. Obviously, we're all trying to navigate pain, and sometimes we do it in healthy, beneficial ways, and sometimes we do it in unhealthy, destructive ways.
Yeah.
That would be one of those.
Yeah, I can completely get that. Us veterans do the same thing. We're going through the steps. It is not a coincidence that when you finally go to the VA to get help, one of the first questions they ask you is, are you having any legal problems? Most of the time, we have either been caught with drugs, trafficking drugs, fighting, domestic lies, all of these types of things, and some of them even much more severe than that. So I do believe that is part of the process. So we've discussed all the really negative stuff that is happening. Let's dig into your organization a little bit. Let's talk about how your organization's coming about to make these changes.
Yeah, thank you. So Compass 31 is my organization, and I say we were born breech in 2011. And by that, I mean, one, professionally, I was a midwife for many years. Language of birth is really, it's kind of my default. But what I mean by being born breech is my husband and I and two of our kids were living and working in Southeast Asia. And I was volunteering at an organization that was working with young women, actually young mothers who had come out of exploitation. And they had babies as a result of the violence against them. And so I started volunteering and teaching English a couple of times a week. And it was great. It was fine. But every time I left, I felt like it wasn't the fullness of what I was meant to do. Based on my history and where I came from, I had this passion and experience, but I had only been volunteering for about 6 weeks. And the director of that project called me and said, Jenisue, we're being shut down by the government, and we have 5 days to find placement for our girls, or they go back. And I would wait, what? So I talked to my husband and I, we talked to our two kids who were 11 and 13 at the time. What do we think? And we said, okay, we could take 3 mama baby sets. So 3 young girls, teenage girls with babies, that we would take them for 4 to 6 weeks while I found placement for them. And I was so naive. I thought literally they would just be in our house for 4 to 6 weeks and I would put them with an organization equipped to deal with them.
Yeah.
But literally God dropped this bloody, squawking miracle of a work into my lap, but first. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a facility. I didn't have the funding, none of that. But these 3 mamas and their babies moved in with us, and I fell in love. And I found out very quickly that there was not another place in all of Southeast Asia that would keep the mamas and babies together. Wow. There were counter-trafficking organizations that would take the teenage girls, and there were orphanages that would take the babies, but there wasn't a single place that kept them together. And for me, my escape, God provided for my rescue and escape at 17 through a pregnancy. So it was completely unthinkable to me.
Yeah.
And so 4 to 6 weeks has turned into, we're 13 and a half years in. And we expanded from that first location with 3 mama baby sets. Then we expanded to Bangladesh, and then to the Middle East. And our newest outreach center just opened in Greece and Athens. I work with survivors here. We created this tool. It's called Priceless Cube, that teaches people about the risks and realities of trafficking. It's a human trafficking prevention tool. It's currently operating in 43 countries. In just 2023, we were able to see our teams were able to impact more than 53,000 individuals with our prevention or restoration models and trained more than 80 organizations. So it's just incredible what that initial, what I thought I was saying yes to where we are today, this international counter-trafficking organization. And one of the things that I love about our work, one of the things that makes Compass 31 really distinct is I'm a huge fan of education. I think education equals empowerment. And if these girls have different opportunities, they are empowered to make different choices. So we developed what we call the Hire to Study program. So all of our program participants, when they come in, day one, they go to the bank with the caseworker and they open a bank account in their own name. And there's two signers, there's them, and then there's their social worker. But the Hire to Study program is they get paid for their participation and performance in school. And the better they perform, the more money they earn. And so every Friday, they get a paycheck, and 1/3 of it automatically goes into their own bank account, their long-term savings. They can put more if they want, but a minimum of 1/3 goes into long-term savings. 1/3 they can use to support their family if they want to. And we help them with all these strategies for economic empowerment. They've built aquaponics gardens. One of our girls bought a motorcycle for her dad so he could get back and forth to work, all different ways that they empower their families. And then 1/3 is just to be kids with, to go to the mall, to buy snacks, to go to the movies, to buy the fancy shoes,
reward
whatever they want. But because of that, we have seen just really tremendous things. Girls go to law school, girls go get their master's degree in social work, graduate from university with a business degree. We've seen just such incredible transformation that then these individuals who grew up in compound complex trauma go on to be culture changers. And when they graduate from our program, because of the Hire to Study program, not only has their school been paid for, but they generally have between $1,500 and $2,000 in their own savings account to begin their life. Awesome. And so that's one of the really cool things about Compass 31 that's pretty distinctive. A lot of counter-trafficking organizations, they have a 6-month program. You come in and you move out and maybe you make purses, maybe you make jewelry. They're kind of all doing the same thing, but they're earning money based on compassion or Torah. How many necklaces do I need? I only need so many necklaces. But if I have a role in empowering these girls to be culture changers, then they go on and they pay it forward. Absolutely. Their kids are getting an education and their kids are growing up to be doctors and lawyers and politicians and
you're breaking the cycle.
Breaking the cycle at the core.
Yep. That is awesome. And I think such a simple idea too, and that is exactly how it needs to be done. There are so many people that can learn from y'all's organization.
It's amazing to watch. I have a front row seat to watching redemption unfold again and again. And this is the most ridiculous thing you're going to hear probably all week. Are you ready? Because I get to see, of course, we've talked about the dark. We've talked about the brutality of it. And that's the reality. That's the backdrop. But I get a front row seat to see the best of rising, of overcoming, of resilience, of these kids becoming all that they were ever meant to be. Instead of being defined by their trauma, they're equipped to be culture changers. And it brings me such joy that I wake up in the morning sometimes and my face is tired from smiling so much in my sleep. Who does that?
Yeah.
We've all been at a party or something that you've laughed or smiled so much that your face is tired.
Yeah.
But I wake up like that. I wake up like that. And my work is counter-trafficking. But the joy of watching what is possible.
Yeah.
It's addictive in the best possible way.
Yeah. I can absolutely relate. When I started moving towards building my nonprofit, I for whatever reason, I just did not feel comfortable or wanting to do something for PTSD. There were so many organizations doing it, but I didn't. It's hard to find anybody that was doing anything for the wins, to
Right.
celebrate the wins. And so I too am on the positive side of things, of helping, veterans become musicians or podcasters or authors or whatever,
Nice.
and I get to see those wins. So I'm on the end of it after they get through their trauma and
Yeah.
blossom, man. So I can relate. It is extremely rewarding, and it's definitely a game changer, because just like you said, their families that they're taking care of are going to reap these benefits years down the road.
Right.
So one other question, I know we're kind of getting a little bit long, but one other question I'm really curious about. Your first location was Southeast Asia, right? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Was that because of where you guys just happened to be at, or was there a specific reason why you made that the first location?
Yeah, we just happened to be there working in another venue, another area. And so my husband had a job there. And at that point, I was a stay-at-home mom. I was homeschooling our two middles. My oldest had already moved out and was living independently, but we had two still at home. So I was a homeschool mom, staying at home and volunteering.
Okay.
But it was in Southeast Asia. We were actually in northern Thailand.
Okay. Well, knowing the little bit I know from soldiers that have been to Thailand, you probably picked the right location. If you were probably to pick a hot spot of this happening, you were probably there. Yeah,
I absolutely, yeah. I sometimes, it was such epidemic proportions, but I thought, if freedom is possible, if redemption is possible, then I'm going to stake my flag here.
Yeah.
I'm going to declare it here. If it's true, it has to be true here. And that's what I've been slinging my sword at for 13 and a half years. And watching freedom unfold.
That is awesome. And again, you've helped so many people, but I don't think you honestly know how many people you've helped, because you have probably potentially changed the path of their families, their younger generations.
Yeah, they're babies, and they're babies.
Yep.
That's the ultimate win right there.
Yep, completely agree. Well, I'm going to bring you forward here and give you a chance to tell everybody where they can find you. I've had your website going, but if there's any social medias or anything that you want people to go, I'll give you your opportunity.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. You can find me at the website, compass31.org. There's an email address on there. You can find me on Facebook at Jenisue Jessen or Compass 31. You can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram, both of those places. I'm kind of in all the social media places, and my name is the same in all of them, either Jenisue Jessen or Compass 31. So if you want to know more personally about me, you can follow my personal one. If you want to know more about my work, hit us up at Compass 31, and I'd love to have a conversation with you.
All right. Well, if you don't mind, I'll put you in the green room and I'll throw my exit video up. And
yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thanks for coming on. Man, what a deep conversation. Again, just like I said in the past, this is something that needs to be talked about. It needs to get out, and people need to have the awareness. I remember as a child, kidnapping was a really big thing, and parents talked amongst themselves about these types of things. These are the conversations that we need to have again and put a stop to it. And the only way that happens is by gaining some knowledge and perspective, and having conversations with Jenisue and her organization is probably the best way that you're going to get some knowledge and be able to have these conversations to educate others. So I appreciate all of you guys that are watching us, listening, supporting us. I don't know how to say it, but other than thank you. So I want you guys to have a great day. Remember, don't let the day kick your ass. Kick its ass.